It was a quiet Sunday morning in West Des Moines, Iowa. The sun had not yet risen. The streets were still, and most families in the neighborhood were asleep, enjoying the calm of a holiday weekend. But one boy, just 12 years old, was already awake. His name was Johnny Gosch, bright, energetic, and independent. Like many kids of the early 1980s, he worked a paper route, earning money and learning responsibility at a young age. That morning, Johnny kissed his dog goodbye, grabbed his red wagon, and set off into the cool September air. He had done this dozens of times before. It was supposed to be routine, but this time, Johnny never came home. What followed would become one of the most chilling and controversial missing child cases in U.S. history. A story that started on a neighborhood street and spiraled outward into a web of strange sightings, secret networks, and whispers of corruption that reached the highest levels of power. At the heart of it all was not just a boy, but a mother who refused to be silent. This is not just a missing person case. This is the haunting tale of conspiracy, cover-up, and unanswered questions. Welcome to Captain Justice True Stories. Subscribe now because justice is coming. The date was Sunday, September 5th, 1982, Labor Day weekend. Johnny Gosch was a typical 12-year-old boy in many ways. He loved sports, riding his bike, and hanging out with friends. But he also had a maturity about him, a sense of responsibility. That morning, around 5:45 a.m., he left home with Gretchen, the family's dachshund, and his trusty red wagon. His job was to pick up bundles of newspapers and deliver them along his route. The early hours were quiet. The dew was still fresh on the grass, the kind of morning that felt safe, ordinary. But eyewitnesses later described something unusual. One neighbor saw Johnny speaking with a man in a blue two-tone Ford Fairmont. Another spotted a second man nearby, seemingly watching from a distance. Both men were strangers. Moments later, Johnny was gone. His wagon was discovered a few blocks away, loaded with neatly stacked newspapers, untouched. Gretchen, the loyal dachshund, found her way back home alone. But Johnny, he had vanished. When his parents, John and Noreen, realized he was missing, panic set in immediately. They knew their son. He was not a runaway. Something was terribly wrong. But when police arrived, they didn't see it that way. Instead of launching an immediate search, they treated the case as if Johnny had simply decided not to come home. Their hesitation, their refusal to call it an abduction, would prove devastating. And so, from the very first hours, the investigation was already slipping away. If the police wouldn't act, Noreen Gosch would. From the very beginning, Noreen was determined. She knew her son. She knew he wasn't a runaway, and she refused to let his case be buried under bureaucracy. Within hours, she began organizing search parties. Neighbors, friends, and strangers joined the effort, combing through streets, parks, and wooded areas. Flyers with Johnny's face were distributed across Iowa. Her home quickly transformed into a command center. Maps covered the kitchen table. Phone lines stayed busy late into the night. Volunteers came and went, all united by one mission: bring Johnny home. But Noreen didn't stop there. She went to the media, appearing on local news stations, begging for information. She spoke with national reporters. Her desperation and courage struck a chord with parents across America. What began as one family's nightmare soon became a national story. And while law enforcement dragged its feet, Noreen pushed forward. She pressured lawmakers. She testified before Congress. And out of her determination came something bigger than anyone could have imagined. Reforms that would change how America handled missing children forever. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was born out of this movement. Amber Alerts and rapid police response protocols came years later, because mothers like Noreen refused to be silenced. But despite these victories, one truth remained: Johnny was still gone. And soon, chilling reports would suggest he might still be alive. In the months and years after Johnny's disappearance, reports began to surface. One witness said they had seen Johnny being marched down the street between two men on the morning he disappeared. Another claimed to have seen him in Oklahoma. A woman there said when she called out his name, the boy turned, his eyes wide with recognition, and then ran. Were these real sightings? Mistaken identity? Or something more sinister? But the most shocking claim came years later. In 1997, Noreen Gosch revealed something that stunned the public. She said Johnny himself, now grown into a man, had appeared at her home in the middle of the night. According to Noreen, he wasn't alone. Another man stood silently by his side. She said Johnny told her he had escaped from a trafficking ring, that he was living in hiding, and that he feared for his life if he went public. He begged her for protection, and then, just as suddenly as he arrived, he was gone again. There was no photographic proof, no corroborating witnesses. Many dismissed the story as impossible, but Noreen swore on her life that it was true, and her claim only fueled suspicions that Johnny's case was part of something much darker than anyone had dared imagine. By the late 1980s, the U.S. was rocked by the Franklin child sex abuse scandal. It centered on allegations of an elite trafficking ring in Omaha, Nebraska, one that supposedly involved politicians, businessmen, and powerful figures. The scandal was explosive. Accusations of cover-ups, rumors of children being flown across the country for abuse, and, chillingly, names that linked back to the very networks some believed had taken Johnny Gosch. Paul Bonacci, a convicted pedophile, gave sworn testimony that he had been forced to participate in Johnny's abduction. He described the car, the men, and secret hideouts used to traffic children. Some of his details matched evidence that had never been made public. Was Bonacci telling the truth, or was he exploiting a grieving family? A judge believed enough to award Noreen a symbolic $1 million settlement in a civil case, though no one was ever criminally convicted. Documentaries, books, and countless articles would follow. Some dismissed the Franklin scandal as a moral panic. Others believed it was one of the biggest cover-ups in U.S. history. For Noreen, there was no doubt. Her son had been caught in a network far bigger than anyone wanted to admit. And then, decades later, came the envelope that brought new nightmares. In 2006, more than 20 years after Johnny's disappearance, Noreen opened her front door to find a manila envelope waiting for her. Inside were photographs. The images showed boys bound, gagged, terrified. To Noreen, one face was unmistakable. It was Johnny. The FBI disagreed, saying the boy was not him. But other experts and survivors claimed the resemblance was too strong to ignore. Were the photos genuine, a cruel hoax, or evidence of something far more disturbing? For Noreen, the answer didn't matter. Seeing those images reopened wounds that had never healed. The media swarmed. The case was back in the spotlight, but Johnny himself remained missing. And through it all, one question echoed louder than ever. How had law enforcement failed him so completely? From the very first hours, police were criticized for mishandling Johnny's case. They refused to label it an abduction. They failed to secure the scene where his wagon was found. They didn't issue an alert. And by the time they finally admitted something was wrong, crucial evidence had already vanished. Years later, retired officers admitted mistakes were made. But apologies could not erase decades of pain. Some officers believed Johnny had been trafficked. Others still clung to the runaway theory. That indecision created cracks where the truth was lost. But even in tragedy, Johnny's story reshaped America forever. Johnny Gosch's disappearance marked a turning point in American history. The Johnny Gosch Bill was passed, requiring police to act immediately in missing child cases. His face became one of the first to appear on milk cartons, staring back at families across the country during breakfast. A haunting reminder that children could vanish without warning. The milk carton campaign made Johnny a symbol. He wasn't just a missing boy anymore. He was the face of a movement. Noreen Gosch became one of the loudest voices for change. She appeared on television. She lobbied lawmakers. She kept her son's name alive when so many others would have been forgotten. Today, every Amber Alert, every missing child poster, every rapid police response owes something to Johnny Gosch. And yet, the boy at the center of it all is still missing. Johnny Gosch was more than a headline, more than a symbol. He was a boy who loved his dog, his red wagon, and his family. His disappearance shook the nation. His case reshaped the law. But Johnny himself, the boy behind the movement, remains lost. And so the question remains more than 40 years later. Where is Johnny Gosch? If you know something, anything, say something. This has been Captain Justice True Stories. Subscribe, like, and share, because the more voices that demand answers, the harder it is for the truth to stay buried. Because justice is coming.